Hi friends, Paisley and Glue here. Today we are going to learn how to turn fabric tubes. And when you're sewing, you're often going to need to make skinny straps for various projects. We're going to learn two tricks. One, how to turn a regular skinny tube, and the other, how to turn a tube while inserting a cord inside it to make a spaghetti strap. So let's get started. Okay, so the first strap we're going to make is a regular turned strap. So I've cut a strip that's 2 inches wide. I've cut a strip that's 2 inches wide. This is also cut on the straight, so it's not cut on the bias. And we are going to turn this into a 3/4 of an inch turned strap. Okay, so for our first strap, we're going to sew this at 3/8. Which just means on this machine, that's a presser foot away. So the edge of the presser foot is gonna line up with the fold of our fabric. I'm just folding this strap in half. We're gonna use a relatively narrow stitch length because we don't want to actually pull out any threads when we're trying to turn this. I'm just gonna stitch all the way down. All right, so you can see this is my fold, here's my stitch line, and then I've got all this extra seam allowance. So I actually need to go ahead and cut all of this off. So I'm gonna use my rotary cutter, and I am going to go ahead and cut off all this seam allowance so that we only have about an eighth of an inch left next to that stitch line. And the smaller the seam allowance is, the easier it's gonna be to turn, but you also want to make sure that you don't make it too small so that it's going to fray through your seam that you stitched. Okay, so now I have gotten some heavy duty thread. You can use buttonhole thread. This is outdoor thread, so it's just a thick polyester thread. I'm going to cut a length of thread that's twice as long as my strip. And then we're going to double that up, make a knot in the end. And then we're going to go ahead and stitch through just one side of this tube. A couple times so it doesn't come out. And then we're gonna drop this needle backside first so it doesn't get stuck on anything all the way through your tube. Depending on how thick your tube is, you might have to help it through a little bit. Now I'm actually gonna trim down this seam allowance so it's really as small as possible right at the top. Now your first little trick is just getting this edge, this little corner tucked in. It might help to use a skinny end of a chopstick. So it's a little hard to get going, but once you do, you should just be able to hold on to your needle end with the cord. And slowly turn that inside out. Okay. So this is a very tiny tube. So that was Not super easy to do, but we did it. It also would be easier if you had a fabric that's a little bit more slippery than this. Also keep in mind that this is not going to work well on a very thick fabric. You'll never be able to get a tube that is this small on a super thick fabric. So keep that in mind. You need to be a little bit bigger than that, or you need to turn it and just top stitch it closed. So there is our straight grain tube, and that finished. It's not pressed yet, but that's about 3/4 of an inch. I'm sorry, 3/8 of an inch. And now let's do our corded one. And then the second strap that we are going to make is our spaghetti strap that has the cord inserted into it. So for this one, I did go ahead and cut a bias strip. This is a 2-inch bias strip of fabric, so it's got some stretch to it. And you can find lots of tutorials on how to cut bias strips. I will link one above. And the other thing you're gonna need is your cord. And the trick here is that you need to cut a piece of cord that is twice the length of your finished strap. So you can see that's double the length of your finished strap. So we have our bias strip here. We have our cord that's twice the length of that. The trick here is that we are going to stitch this like it's piping, and then we're going to flip it inside out. So we've got our strip, we got our piping, we're going to fold our strip over our piping like we're sewing piping. Fold our strip over the cording. And we have changed our machine foot to a zipper foot or a piping foot, whatever you have. And we're gonna go ahead and stitch this like we are stitching piping. Now you don't need to stitch as close to the edge. In fact, you want to keep it a little bit far away from the cording. First of all, you don't want to get the cording caught in the needle at all, because that would make it impossible to turn. And you also need to let the piping have a slight bit of ease in it so that when you turn it, there's enough space for your seam allowance. So we're not going to be too concerned about staying as nice and snug to the cording as we normally would. Okay, the most important thing here is we need to stitch over our cording so it can't slide out. So make sure that's good and secure, and you're going to leave all of this tail sticking out the bottom, because this is the cording that will actually end up being inside of the strap. Similarly to what we did before, we are going to cut off everything but a scant 1/8 seam allowance, so it's just a little bit under 1/8 of an inch, because all of that is going to end up inside of our strap. All right, so we have a little tail here on the end that we can hold on to, and then our goal here is to roll this red down over this cording. So again, it's a little bit hard to get the first part started. Actually, I'm gonna just trim away this extra seam allowance I have. Okay, so again, I'm holding onto this side as I'm pulling my cording down. I actually think this is much easier to do than the thread method. It's a little bit easier on your hands. And I think it's just easier to slide down. Okay, so there we go. So now you have this excess here. So if you didn't cut this off of your spool of cording, your spool would sort of be going off this way. So then you could just snip it off there and then you'd be all done. It wouldn't waste anything. Or if you're like me and cut this off, then you do have this extra amount of cord. So put it with your stash, see if you can use it later. But then we have our spaghetti strap ready to go. And sometimes I think that this is such an easier way to do it even than the last method that we looked at, that I will sometimes use the cord and then unpick this edge and then just pull the cord out to get my, my flat tube. And then I'll just press it at that point. Because I just think it's so much easier to turn it with the cord and get it to turn smoothly and evenly. So here are our two tiny straps. We've got, I pressed this, so now we've got our flat strap. So this finishes off actually at about 1/4 of an inch, so that's pretty tiny. And then we've got our spaghetti strap, which has that cord inserted into it. And so that's more of a rounded strap. And this is also bias. It's a bias strip, so it actually curves really evenly and nicely. So if you were gonna add this and do like a soutache design, then you could just applique this piece straight onto your garment and it would be really pretty, kind of 3-dimensional trim choice to add onto there. So there we go. So 2 methods of turning tiny straps. Hope that that works and is helpful for you in the future. And let me know in the comments if you have any other suggestions. See you next time.